A harvest service. I wonder what your feelings are about this festival. Perhaps there's a bit of nostalgia. It reminds me of church in my childhood, when Sunday school children would process to the front of the church to bring fruit, vegetables and flowers, which would later be distributed to people and organisations in the community, or even auctioned off to raise funds at the harvest sale. I can still see and imagine and smell the scene in church, the flower displays, the specially made loaf from a local bakery, which always had a pride of place. And there were a few other things on display as well, less colourful but essential fruits of the earth, the lump of coal, glass of water, a plate of soil, oil to give thanks to God for his provision. And then there's food. I wonder if you've ever tried to identify where all the ingredients for your meals come from around the world. Not just the local supermarket or wherever they were bought, but the actual growers and producers. United Kingdom, Europe, USA, or around the world. Every time we sit down for a meal, we should take a moment to be thankful. From places far away, food has been harvested by people, often earning very little money. Food has been transported by ship and lorry, processed somewhere in Britain, put on shelves in supermarkets. And if any of these chains were to be broken by shortages, drought, war or strikes, then of course the food wouldn't be there on my plate or yours at all. So when we look at the food in our plates at our next meal, remember those who cooked it, but remember too where the food came from, who planted it, reared it, harvested it, and brought it to our plates. In the 21st century though, and in the suburbs of our cities, we might perhaps question why we sing about ploughing fields and scattering seeds, when most of us have no real connection as to the agricultural world. Harvest in this country now is not the life and death issue it once was. After all, even if the weather were to ruin things and the British harvest were to fail completely, the shops would no doubt still be full of produce brought in from around the world. It's just that those things would cost us more and our carbon footprint would be even bigger than it is now. And as we look around supermarkets at any time of the year, we can all too easily assume that harvest is now a year-long rather than a seasonal event. With a choice and abundance of food that marks our lifestyle in this Western world, not to mention the amount of food we throw away, the traditional harvest can seem little more than a distant or a quaint memory. We've lost touch with the rhythm of the seasons and their fruits. So in some ways the Harvest Festival today can serve as a reminder of our dependence upon the earth and its produce and those who work to bring it to our shops and homes. But our Harvest Festival should do more than that, and our festival isn't just about the past, it's also about today and tomorrow. In recent years we've been increasingly aware of the fragility of the environment, the destruction of natural habitats, global warming, the controversy over GM crops, an awakening in a sense that the earth and the living things we take for granted are precious and vulnerable. The natural resources that we do have are not necessarily infinite. Not many years ago, everything had its season. You could look forward with anticipation to the first strawberries of the summer. But now it seems as though we can have strawberries and cauliflower and cucumber all the way through the year. Things have changed. Not, of course, in some countries. We've all seen those pictures on television of the problems in African countries where there's been a lack of rain, where the seed hasn't managed to germinate, let alone get anywhere near ripening. What celebrations there must be in such countries when conditions are favourable and a sufficient crop is harvested to ensure that families will not go hungry through the winter months. When we look back at the history of the Harvest Festival, perhaps we hesitate to give thanks. Other people have given thanks for the maturing of crops that would sustain them through the following months, and there are many customs, rituals, the offerings of the first fruits to the gods that were taken over by the early church in an attempt to water down the pagan beliefs. By the Middle Ages, the first corn from the harvest was made into the Eucharist bread on the 1st of August. When the harvest had been gathered home, harvest would be celebrated in a farmer's house, using the last sheaf of grain to make a corn dolly based on the belief that the corn's spirit was contained within that dolly. Nowadays, harvest is usually observed in late September, early October, a tradition that only goes back as far as 1843, courtesy of a Cornish vicar. And in a way it's a bit depressing, because the closer that we look at the harvest, it's been handed down to the church from its pagan past, and the less it seems to have relevance to our modern world. We need to remind ourselves of the real significance of this festival, go back to our Christian roots within the Old Testament and among the Jewish people and their relationship with God. The real purpose was a spiritual purpose, a great and glorious meeting together of God and his people, giving thanks for all that God had done. So on this harvest day, we come to give thanks for flowers, fruits, vegetables, for all of God's blessings. Thank you. Thank you. It's the shortest and simplest prayer imaginable, but one perhaps we too often forget. How often do we show gratitude? In this way, we bring fruit and vegetables, flower and foliage into the church to decorate it, to remind us of all the good things that God has given to us, for we can too often become complacent. Let's look at those verses, those words that Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Paul writing to the Corinthians about their giving, their generosity. They had started a collection for the Christians in Jerusalem who were having a tough time, but for some reason their goodness, their collection had stopped. And Paul wrote to them to encourage them to continue it. There was a call for generosity. Paul is here encouraging these Christians and us to an attitude of generosity in their giving. They should give, not sparingly or reluctantly, but cheerfully and generously, because that's what should be reflecting the giving heart of God. That same call applies as God calls us to be generous in seeking to provide for the needs of others. Are those words which describe our attitude to giving? Are we good at giving cheerfully and generously when we're called to do so? Paul teaches them that, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that in all things and all times you will abound in every good work. God has been so good, so generous to us, we should respond in all that we can. And the result of that, God calls his people to generous giving as a response to his love, his generosity. But let's remind ourselves that anything we do, any harvesting that we do, is limited to what we plant. We can only harvest what we plant. In other words, if we haven't sown it, God can't multiply it. It's that pattern of multiplication. It's only when we put what we have into the hands of Jesus that is multiplied. It's also about the harvest coming after the planting. The world that we live in is a world which has an instant gratification. I know I can be like that at times. I've planted some grass seed recently. There's nothing there the next day. We want to see results straight away. Results, though, take time. Real change takes time to grow. And also remember that we can't do anything about this year's harvest, but we can change next year's. You reap today what you sowed yesterday. I was reading about an old proverb, and it said that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. We have to see beyond our shiny, colourful display of fruit to the responsibility that God places on each of us to make the kind of harvest we celebrate. For the world, for those who will sleep rough tonight, for those who will go to bed hungry, for the poor around us, for those in Iraq, Afghanistan, Sumatra, Zimbabwe, wherever God's children are to be found, remembering that there is more than enough to go around if only we could share. And so our gifts of produce go to those in need, to help them in times of difficulty. And our God, who stretched out the heavens and created everything, relies on us to care and gives us what we need to do just that. Let us be thankful. Let us be generous. Let us be cheerful in all that we do and give in response to his great love for us. Amen.